So here are some quick hints and tips to get you started with XCOM Chimera Squad. XCOM is traditionally a game series that you'll find quite difficult to get started with if you don't roughly know what you're doing, and it can be really beneficial to make sure that you know what to expect and how to handle some of the combat strategies and the strategy aspects of the game. So first of all, you want to make sure that when you're upgrading things, you upgrade your armour and you upgrade your mods. Now these might be just for armour to increase the resilience of your squad, but also the mods that increase the various breach options are really important. You want to try and equip as many of those as you possibly can, because breach options will make it make you much more successful in the routes that you can get into areas. A lot of the buffs and debuffs that are applied to certain entry routes can only be negated based on if you have the equipment or if you have the ability to actually access those. Alert, aggressive and surprised. When you enter a breach, you might see some of these words and have a rough idea. What they actually mean is, alert is when a soldier is ready for you to enter and will be behind some kind of cover. Aggressive means that they are alert, waiting for you, probably in some cover, maybe not, but they will hit you at the end of the round if you haven't killed them or done something to negate their attack. Surprised enemies won't attack you at the end of the breach, but they are more likely to be damaged. One of the best tips I can give you here is to make sure that you go for the enemies that are surprised and try and wipe out as many as possible to reduce the enemy number or the enemy load that are on the actual field in any given scenario. The less enemies you have, the less chance you have of being attacked. One of the best tips I can give you for dealing with the aggressive enemies is to use the Phalanx ability. The Phalanx ability will allow Cherub to absorb shots with his shield. If you use this, enemies seem to be drawn towards attacking him. So if you use that on a breach, it will pretty much negate any attack that the enemies have given to other characters, unless you're really unfortunate. So that means you can focus on the weakened, the easier to hit enemies and destroy them, and therefore reduce the numbers you need to fight. Don't be afraid to use all of your ability on breaches, because they will restart after the next turn. Also, when you're fighting enemies, if any enemies are low on health, don't be afraid to use knockdown abilities on them, because you can always position your character and make sure that they're not going to be attacked in the timeline, and you'll also get a lot of intel for that at the start. Turns, as I just mentioned, are per unit, so what that means is your turns are based around the timeline. Pay specific attention to it, because you can be really aggressive with your characters and crush enemies that are going to show up next on the timeline or stop their attacks completely, and then you can make sure that you're then back in a good position before any other enemies attack, or you can destroy them before they do that. Make sure you make use of the character abilities, because that area of the game is way more dynamic than it used to be, and those attacks are more like a hero based system like Overwatch. I'll be doing some additional videos to help support you with those and to show what each character can do, but it's really worth manipulating that. You also want to make sure you flank enemies as much as possible. Use the timeline to see when next enemies are going to attack, and this elaborates on an earlier point, but you can actually use this extremely aggressively to position yourself in a way that you wouldn't do in an earlier XCOM game, because you'd open yourself to damage when your turn ended. However, in this, you probably have a chance to wipe out other enemies if you know and you've stacked your abilities and your attacks in order to make sure that you're able to counter that. If you have any explosives, use those as much as possible to destroy cover, which has a similar effect to being flanked and also means that other enemies can't advance on you. Overwatch is a little bit less useful than it was in previous games, but you can still use it if you're not going to make a proper attack on enemies. You can cover the ground in between those enemies if they need to relocate or move, and it's probably worth doing that if you've got anything below 40% chance of shooting. On the map, wait until you have a big enough squad before you do Spec Ops. Spec Ops is very useful. It's similar to just grinding out some of the objectives before, where you just click on it and time would pass. However, on this it's a little bit more risky, because when a day passes it does increase your unrest, which then leads to your city anarchy, which will end your game if that starts to build up too much. Be wary of major damage to characters, as they now have to be treated for scars and other conditions, and that will cost a lot of time, and because you don't have a massive squad in this one, it does mean that you will end up with teammates that aren't on the field. If you are advancing the map for progress, or you're trying to develop things and research things, which comes under training and assembly, then be aware that this has a bigger impact than it does before. You are better at making sure that you wait till your squad is big enough to sustain that. That pretty much summarises all the tips that I can give you for this at this point in time. I'll be doing specific focuses on other characters later.